Hi, my name is CareyHolzman. I'm the co-host of the free podcast, Tech Vets. It's available at www.tech-vets.com. Be sure and check it out. It's a free on-demand broadcast, audio broadcast that you can listen to over your computer. And it might be something to check out when you're waiting in between videos, for the next video. It's all about the trials and tribulations of running your own business, specifically a computer repair business. And I host it along with my good friend Mike Smith. Mike's out in Philadelphia, and we run our businesses totally different, which often gets very entertaining and informational about different ways that we go about resolving certain problems or just avoiding those problems altogether. So check it out. I think if you enjoy my videos here on YouTube, I think you'll enjoy my podcast as well. And of course, it's free. In my previous video, I built a computer for somebody in Louisiana, and let's see, I shipped that computer on a Tuesday. It was $87 to ship FedEx ground, plus I paid an additional $20 for them to it was like $10 for the box and then $10 for them to pack it, to double box it. In other words, to take all those boxes and put them into one big box. So I think it was $108 or $108 total. It arrived 4 days later from Phoenix to Louisiana. I had pulled the video card on it, if you remember, and I made a little video just for him. It was an unlisted video that showed him how to unbox it and put the video card in. And he texted me, said he got it, and he said, quote unquote, "This machine is incredible." So I love that. I love getting that kind of response. He's going to have his own YouTube channel up and running soon enough, and when he does, I'll be sure to put a link to it in the previous video. What happened here with the parts that you see exploded out in front of you, another viewer had contacted me that's local in the Phoenix, Arizona area and said, "I bought my parts months ago. You inspired me to build my own computer. And I've been so busy. I'm going to school and I've got, a wife and kids to take care of, and I got some of it installed, but I just haven't really gotten around to it. I don't have a lot of confidence. And would you build it for me? What would you do for me?" So basically, I told him, I said, "I'll build it for free. In fact, I'll come pick up the parts. I'll build it for free, and I'll deliver it back to you if you let me make a video out of it. You're local to the Phoenix area, so it's just my time and my gas. To make the video would be beneficial for all the viewers." So the answer to his question, is obviously the answer is right before you on this table. We had some of the parts installed, and what I've done is I've taken the parts out and I've put them back in the boxes. He only had a couple things installed, so I want it to be like a whole new install. Other boxes he's opened and he's inspected the parts, so the seals have been broken, and that's why. And he's got a K90 keyboard, and he's got a gaming mouse, and he's got a big Asus like 27-inch monitor or something. And of all the boxes he didn't open and inspect was the monitor. And I told him, I said, if that screen of that monitor cracked in shipping, you've waited too long to do anything about it. If all the boxes you should have opened and checked months ago when this stuff arrived, you should have opened that monitor box and just checked to make sure that the monitor is not cracked. But it is what it is, and hopefully it's information for those of you out there who might be in the same situation now or in the future. When you get your parts, it's not really that important that you open these boxes up. This is all solid state stuff. You want to check your case, make sure it doesn't have any dents or damage. Typically, if the box doesn't, the case won't, but you never know until you look at it. And the same holds true for a monitor. Monitor is very fragile, and the screens can often crack in shipping. I wouldn't say often, but it's not rare. I'll put it to you that way. It happens. You have to excuse me. I'm once again fighting another cold. I don't know why I get sick so much, but what we've got here. There's a little dent in this case. I'm just seeing. What we've got here. This is another Corsair case. This is a Corsair Carbide 500R, and it kind of reminds me of a stormtrooper from Star Wars, doesn't it? The great thing about this case is that because it's made by Corsair, we can do something to this I haven't done in any of my other gaming builds. You see this top piece just opens up like this, and we can take that off. And I've just set this in here because I don't have a box for it. But this is the Corsair H100i water cooling system. And it's all a closed loop system, and we're going to use this instead of the stock CPU fan. I'm just going to put that back in there for now because it's just made to fit in there. I mean, the cooling system's made by Corsair, the case is made by Corsair, and it just looks brilliant because you just don't even know it's there. So we'll get into how to install that later, but just so you know, that's under there. That's what's going on under there. Everything else in here is empty. What do we have for parts? For parts, we've got the Seasonic 750 watt power supply. I've heard a lot of good things about Seasonic power supplies. The reason I don't use them is they're expensive. This is the first time I will be using a Seasonic power supply, and I have high expectations that it's going to be a great power supply and be as good as the other power supplies I've used in other videos. The video card is a SAPPHIRE HD 7970. You've seen me use this in my first gaming build of 2013. Pretty much the same card. There is, well, these couple of cooling fans. These go to the water cooler. So I'll show you how that works when we get to that. The CPU is a Core i5 3570K. Apparently he's going to overclock it. I don't support overclocking, but you know, if he does that and he runs into problems, he's going to have to fix his own problems. That's what it means when I say I don't support it. Besides that, I'm building the computer for freeform anyway. The motherboard. This, you know, I think he did a really good job picking all of his parts. I probably would have recommended all of these parts except for two things he did that I would not have done. Now, that doesn't mean that's bad. It just means it's not what I would have done. He went with an AsRock Z77 Extreme 4 motherboard. And, you know, what he did is, I think like anybody else, he went online, he talked to some friends that are into gaming and got different opinions. Everybody's got an opinion, and he made his best decision based on that information. Now, that's not to say this board is junk. I haven't, I got burned really bad by AsRock on a customer system that cost me money to fix. And because of that, I don't recommend them anymore. That doesn't mean every product they make is junk or every product's going to fail. I just personally had a bad experience, and as a result of that bad experience, I avoid their products. So we'll see. Maybe this will change my mind about them. This I would have used a Gigabyte or an Asus board. I would not have used an AsRock board. The other thing he did that I would not have done is he's decided to go right here. This is Windows 8. I would have gone with Windows 7. I think Windows 7 is going to be better for gaming. It's just a more mature operating system. There will be an update for 8 called 8.1. It'll be a free update. It should be coming out in the fall of 2013. I think it'll be about 2 gigs in size. You'll be able to download that. It'll take forever, but once you get it, you'll be able to apply it for free. And Microsoft is bringing the start button back, but they're not bringing back any start menu, which is like a big middle finger from Microsoft going, oh, you want your start button back? Here's your start button back. But when you click it, it's got to take you to the Metro interface. Ha 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 ha. Enjoy your start button. Anyway, don't get me started on the start button. With the RAM, he's going with G.SKILL Sniper 16 gigs. There's 2 8 gig modules there. For the hard drive, he's got a Seagate Barracuda 2 terabyte drive to install his programs on. The operating system will be installed on a solid state drive. This is the Samsung 840 series. This is the 250 gig drive. You know, the 840 Pro series, a little faster reading and writing, but you know what? It's a great solid choice. He's got an Asus DVD reader writer. You know, these are like 20 bucks, basic, you know, it's not Blu-ray or anything. And then we got a card reader, multimedia card reader, and because this case doesn't have any 3.5-inch bays, we've got an adapter to convert that. You've seen me do that in other videos. And one other thing we're going to be adding to this computer that you haven't seen me add to other machines is a wireless card, so he can access Wi-Fi. But here's the thing, a lot of people seem to think that Wi-Fi is everywhere. Like, you don't have to have internet. Like a radio, you just turn it on and you just get free music. You have to have wireless internet around you in order to get wireless internet on your computer. So ideally you have your own wireless internet that you're paying for, or that your parents are paying for, or that it comes with your apartment, or it's part of the community. You're not ideally stealing it from a neighbor, and if your neighbor had it secured, you wouldn't be able to get into it anyway. So you're not going to be able to just plug a Wi-Fi card in and get internet unless you've already got internet, if that makes any sense. The whole point of this is just to be able to get your internet without a cable, stringing a cable across the floor upstairs. So this is a Rosewheel wireless N PCI adapter. This is the RNX N250 PC2, and these are our parts. Now, if you've seen my other videos, you know where we're going to start. We're going to start with installing things into the case that we don't have to worry about anti-static protection or anything at this point. Things like our power supply and our drives, our card reader, we can install those now into the case. The more I look at this case, the more I'm seeing little bits of damage to it. I see like a little indentation here. The camera may not be picking this up, and there's a little indentation here that might be able to be popped out. But what I'm going to do in this video is use the Panasonic EY7410 screwdriver. Of all the cordless drivers I've got, and if you've seen my videos, I have a lot of cordless drivers. I have a problem and I need help. But this one is my favorite. This is it. Of all the drivers, this is the one. It's not perfect, and I've done a full review on this driver along with all my others. I'll put a link to that in the notes below this video. And anyway, let's go ahead and take this case apart. Let's get it opened up. We've got 4 screws on the back, 4 thumb screws here. You'll see that's a pattern with a lot of cases, that there's often 2 screws that hold each side panel in. So I'm going to go ahead and remove all 4 of the screws right now. Well, I take that back. In this case, you don't actually remove the screws, you just unscrew them. The screws will stay in. That's cool. Me likey. Let's set this down. And you want to make sure you set that down somewhere where you're not going to kick it or step on it or knock it over, or you're going to dent it, scratch it. You could put it back in the box that the case came in, get it out of the way. Well, I'm not used to having those screws stay in. I like that. That comes back about 1/2 inch, and then the whole thing just comes off. There's a great big 200mm fan on the inside. The bigger the fan, the quieter it is, because it can move more air without having to spin as fast as a smaller fan, and is therefore quieter. That's going to blow right onto the video card. That's pretty cool. I like that. So let's go and turn this around and give you a little peek inside of here, what we got to work with. Now, I showed you the water cooler earlier. That's what this is hanging down. The case does not come with it, all right? That's sold separately, and it would have been put back in its original box and set out here for later install if I'd had the box. So that's the best way to just keep it out of the way. This top, you just push on it, and it just opens up, and that's how I get to the water cooler. That's all going to be screwed down and everything later on. There's like a little tray up here, which is cool. If you were to, I don't know, have let's say a little portable hard drive, right? Like a laptop size hard drive, you could set it in there, and with your USB ports right there, you could just plug it in and have your backup drive right there, which is really cool, because that's well thought out. Because if you have those little USB drives, which by the way, I have like 15 or 16 of those things, they're my main source of backing up myself and my clients' computers. And if the USB ports are up here, and you have a case that's got like that, well, you saw me build that gaming system, or if you haven't, you can go back and look. There's a system I built in November of 2012, and it uses the NZXT Phantom 410 case, and that case has like an angled top, and you can't set anything on top. So with the USB ports on top, you end up having to hang stuff off. That's not good. I don't want my USB hard drive hanging off of its USB cable. That's just bad. Other cases may have the USB ports in the middle, and then it's a pretty tall case. And the cables on those USB drives, no more than 10 inches long, usually. So it's not quite enough to reach the top, it's not quite enough to reach the bottom. You see where I'm going with this, right? I like it. Now, Corsair doesn't send me any cases to review. They certainly haven't sent me this one. I'm not paid by any sponsors for anything. Whether you see that Coca-Cola bottle in the back or the little toys in the back, nobody's paying me to put that there. That's just me being a nerd, okay? So my opinions are my own, and what you're hearing is from my own experience and my own thoughts, which could be completely wrong or opposite of yours, all right? But they're right for me. Here's a close-up of the front ports and switches on the front of the case. So there's your power switch. That'll light up. There's a light behind it. You've got your hard drive activity LED right below it. You've got two USB 3.0 ports, your microphone input, your headphone output. There's an optional FireWire connector there. I don't know who uses FireWire anymore. We won't be using that on this build. This button here controls the lighting on the two front fans to turn it on and off. And then you've got a 3-position fan speed switch here. So it's got 3 positions. And then right below that, right here, is your reset switch. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5¼ inch external bays. On the inside, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 places for internal drives. These little trays come out, and there's little holes on the bottom to fix the little 2.5 inch solid state drives. And what else do we have in here? There's a toolless design there. We've got USB 3.0, and it's a bottom mounted power supply on the back. You've got these grommeted holes, and these are here if anytime you're going to hook up something that's going to go from the back of the motherboard to the back of the case, like some water cooling systems, for example. Not the one we're using. The one we're using is going to be all internal, but there's some where you need to run the pipes out. There's like USB hubs that are internal, and you've got to plug them into the USB ports on the back of the motherboard. So you'd have to somehow run it from inside the computer to the back of the USB port on the back of the board. That's what you'd use that for. Most people don't use them, but that's what they're for. And then here you'll see for cable management, we've got these grommeted places here. What did I do? I lost a foot already? I did, look at that. The little rubber foot came off. And we'll just stick that right back on there. It's got on the bottom, it's a good point to just show that to you. They're not just hard plastic feet, they're rubberized feet, and there's a big filter right here. It's a giant filter that comes out to clean. That's going to be for your power supply intake fan, and then if you want to add an additional fan, you can. Kind of awkward to have that big, but I suppose it's convenient to not have to remove 2 filters. You always want to filter your fans that are bringing air in. You do not filter fans like this one that are pushing air out. So just an FYI. Especially here in Arizona, we have a lot of dust, so those filters are pretty important, and it's pretty important that you clean them regularly. Now with the cover off, one of the very first things we can install is the power supply. So again, this is the Seasonic, this is the 750W power supply. And in the box, what do we have? We have some Velcro wire ties, we've got some nylon zip ties, and we've got some mounting screws. Warranty, email support, yeah. We get a bag. You know how much I love these bags. In the bag there is a power cord. Hey, look at Intel, it's a power cord. Everybody gets one. You think Intel's watching this? That's a reference to a video I did on the Intel NUC, the next unit of computing. And apparently the next unit of computing, our future means we don't get power cables, if you believe in Intel's future. You have to sort of just figure that out on your own. Here's your new product. Good luck finding a power cable. Anyway, what do we got in here? This is a modular power supply, so we've got all of our connectors. Let's go ahead and just get those out. And what else do we have in here? You know what, I'll take the power cable out too. And what else? more modular connectors. So the idea behind these modular connectors is that you're only going to use the power cables you need for the hardware that you have, and the extra power cables you just put away somewhere, and that keeps the internal looks of your case much cleaner without all this cabling laying around. You know, because a power supply, a regular power supply is going to have cables built into it, and they don't know what you've got in your system, so they try and give you a little bit of everything, and as a result you're going to have stuff left over, and then you have to wire tie it and make it look clean. So anyway, these are all of our cables. We'll go ahead and just take those out. We won't need them yet. Wow, they see, Sonic really gives you your money's worth on cables, don't they? There's a lot of cables there. But what else is in here? We've got an owner's manual, because nothing's more important than knowing how to screw your power supply in. Yeah, that's way too thick. What have they got in there? Now there's a velvet bag in here. Really? A velvet bag. I think Crown Royal comes in a bag just like this. Not that I'm a drinker, but I really think these bags are stupid. I guess the idea is, okay, here's our power supply, big heavy power supply. And I guess the idea is you could take your extra cables, the ones you're not going to use, and you can put them in this bag, right? But then on the other hand, if that's really what this bag is for, then why did they give me this one too? I don't get it. It's just, to me, it's a waste of resources. I think it's, you know, you guys keep your bags and take a couple bucks off the price of the power supply. How about that? That's what I would like. All right, it's a minor complaint. It has nothing to do with the quality of the power supply itself. It's just it just seems unnecessary and frivolous, if that wasn't redundant. Anyway, that's all that's in that box. Now, one thing I can tell you about power supplies, and this is going to sound kind of goofy, but it really plays out to be true. This power supply is heavy. You can generally tell how good a power supply is by how heavy it is. And I realize that sounds so ridiculous. Back in the 80s, I know I really liked a nice heavy phone, back when we had corded landlines. And the heavier the handset was, it just felt like it was better quality to me. And I remember I took one apart one time to see how well it was made, you know, because it had so much weight to it. And when I opened it up, I found a big lead weight that was inside, and that's how they made it heavy. Now, it's possible some unscrupulous power supply makers may do that. I've not run into that. To me, the cheaper, you know, the $20 power supplies, they weigh like a pound. There's nothing to them, and they generally don't last. They run hot, they don't put out the wattage they say they do. And the big heavy, not big, but you know, the heavy power supplies, because let's face it, they're all the same size, right? The heavy ones generally have larger transformers, larger capacitors. Their output wattage can often be actually more than what they say instead of less than what they say on the cheap ones. So keep that in mind. You know, if you're shopping for a power supply, if you're at a store and you pick up the box and that power supply says it's $29, then go pick up the box of another power supply that's $100 and feel the weight yourself of the two different power supplies. I'll bet you the $100 one is going to be heavier, and it's going to be better. It's going to last longer, it's going to have higher output, it's going to run cooler, and ultimately you're going to be happier with it. Now this power supply has a fan on the bottom. This is an intake fan, so that fan is going to face down at these holes. Get some of this out of the way so you can see here. So the back of the power supply is where your power plug is going to go, right? And well, actually that would be the front of the power supply. The back would be where all these connectors are. And these are all optional connectors that we can use to hook up our hardware. Depending on what hardware you have will determine which of these connectors you'll use. So this side is going to face out on the back of the power supply. The fan is going to face down. Now, with the fan facing down, and you know the fan is sucking air in, what does that mean if you put this on carpet? That means you've got a vacuum cleaner. That means your computer can't breathe. So, if you're going to put this on carpet, you probably ought to turn that around so that your fan's bringing air in from the inside of the case. You can do it either way. However, there's a reason the filter's on the bottom. All right? The intention of the case engineers is to have you put that power supply in with that fan facing down and bringing air in from the bottom of the case. And their intention is that you don't set this on carpeting where it would block the airflow. Something to keep in mind. We're just going to set that in there. By the way, there's little rubber feet in here for the power supply to sit on. And what that does is that will help with vibration, right? Because there's a fan in there that's spinning, and that helps the system run quieter. So little touches like that are another difference you get when you buy a name brand case like a Corsair or even a mid-range to high-end case versus the cheapest case you can buy. This is going to run a lot quieter. Now you see I just set that in there. It's just resting there. And I can reach in here and just, what I want to do is I want to put one screw in each corner. Now you'll see on this power supply, because it can be mounted numerous ways, it's actually possible for me to put 2 screws in this corner and 2 screws in this corner. But if I do that, I won't have any screws left for the other corners. So what I do is I pick here's how I decide which of these holes I'm going to use. I pick the one that's closest to the corner, right? We've got 4 screws we're going to use. They came with the power supply. They're right in here. Here's our 4 screws. We're going to go 1 screw in each corner. And I don't want to tighten the screws all the way down just yet. I just want to get them started so that I can kind of move that power supply around if I need to get the holes to line up. And you'll see I'm going to each corner, 1 screw in each corner. If there's a place to put 2 screws, don't, because you'll run out of screws. All you need is 1 in each corner. Now this screwdriver is set to a torque setting of 3, and its screwdriver automatically turns off when it hits that torque setting. So every screw is torqued to the same specification. Now, you don't have to tighten these screws in any specific order. In other words, you don't have to do opposite corners or anything. It's a good habit to get into. It doesn't hurt anything by doing that. You'll see that the switch here, we've got an on-off switch. Make sure that switch is in the off position. You'll also notice that the word Seasonic is upside down, and you'll also see that the power connector, in my opinion, looks upside down. It's almost as if Seasonic intended you to install this power supply with the fan facing up. Again, you know, who are you going to go with? Do you go with the engineers who did the power supply, or do you go with the engineers who did the case? In my opinion, you go with the engineers who did the case. Again, unless you're going to be sitting in on carpeting, that fan should be facing down towards that filter to use that filter to bring air in from the bottom of the case. It will not affect, if you turn the power supply around, your system's still going to boot, it's still going to run. How's it going to affect your airflow? Is it going to be better? Is it going to be worse? Really depends on your environment. It depends on your hardware. There's a lot of variables there. I don't think it'll make that big of a difference, to be honest. You know, if it makes a 1 or 2 degree difference. So go with what you feel is right, and you can always change your mind and take 4 screws out and flip it around. So it's not like it's irreversible regardless of what decision you make. If you're following along with me, I recommend you do it as I do it if you want to have the same results that I have at the end of this video. Now the next thing that's really super easy to install is your optical drive, your DVD, CD, Blu-ray player, whatever it is. So I've got ours right here. Let's go ahead and take this out of its packaging here. Looks like it came with Power DVD 12 or something. I don't know why it came with that, but we'll put that in the motherboard box with the rest of the stuff. And you really can install this in any of these bays. So what you gotta ask yourself is, where's it gonna look best? Or where's my cabling gonna look best? I always like to go for the top. Now to take one of these front covers out, you actually can pull the whole face of the computer off. If you reach down below, there's a gap under the bezel here. And if I just kind of pull away the front bezel from the front of the case, and you want to be a little gentle when you do this because you don't want to break any of the plastic tabs. And you should be able to just pull it away, and then your whole front bezel comes off. This is called a bezel. And you can see we've got these front covers that come off, depending on which ones you want to use. We know we're going to need 2 of them removed, right? Because we're going to need the card reader and the optical drive installed in here. And there's little plastic clips, and we just bend those back. See, I've even got little foam in there to keep it quiet. That's a nice touch. These will go in the motherboard box. You might need them in the future if you make changes to your hardware. Let's say you don't want the card reader anymore, or you go with an external. Then you're going to end up with a big gaping hole in the front of your case. It'll look like it's missing teeth. And then you can put these back in to make it look good again, because you never know what changes the future might hold. And I have to say, kudos once again to Corsair here. These are not plastic tabs, they're metal. So you don't have to be as careful as I assumed you did. We have another intake fan here, or intake filter, which I guess is a little more difficult to get out and clean. I'm not exactly sure why they did it that way. But what it looks like is this front piece is being held in like a picture frame, like you've got these metal parts. And I don't think you're supposed to bend those back out. They're metal. You keep bending them back and forth, they will break. So to clean this filter, I guess you just kind of bend up on it and take it out. Similar to just, if you've ever put a picture in a picture frame, they didn't make that easy. So that's not so good. On the other hand, you know, this isn't the side of the filter that's going to get dirty. It's this side of the filter that's going to get dirty, right? Because it's going to bring air to this side. So, well, that's a little bit of a disappointment. But, you know, it is what it is. It's a great case. I would have made this filter easier to get to if it was me personally. But what's perfect in this world, right? We've got our 2 fans here. You'll see that unlike that 200R case where it only has the 1 fan that blows over the video card, these fans actually blow over the hard drives, which to me is an important consideration. I like that. So let's go ahead and put this back on now. That's just gonna, you just push it on and it clicks in. There's 6 of those. You probably heard 6 clicks, right? We can take our optical drive. I want to put it right up here on the top. You should be able to just feed the drive in from the front, and if you slide it in, it should lock right into position. This little tab right here on the side is going to move back and forth, and it's going to line up with the mounting holes on the front and lock itself in. If you want to take the drive back out, now we're in the future, you simply push this forward like this, and then you can push or slide the drive right back out. So again, just push it in, you'll hear it click. Now, you don't have to put any screws in this. Now this leads me to the next question that seems to appear a lot, and that is where do you get the screws to mount the optical drive or the motherboard? The screws are going to come with your case. So in this case, at the very bottom, right down here, there's a box that's in one of the hard drive holders here. And you just take it out, we can put the hard drive holder back. It just slides in. And in this box, and every case is going to have some little baggie or some little box in it. We're going to have, let's see, we've got a nylon zip tie and some little sticky wire management loops, which we won't use those. We've got a USB 3 to USB 2 adapter because these are USB 3 ports on the front of this case. If you were hooking up an older style motherboard that did not have USB 3 headers on it, or at least one USB 3 header, you would not be able to hook up those front port USBs unless you adapted it down to a USB 2. And of course then they would run at USB 2 speeds, but at least you could use them. And then what else we have in here? We've got some motherboard standoffs. We've got what appear to be motherboard mounting screws. We've got these long screws that are used for a water cooling system, which is interesting since the water cooling system comes with its own screws anyway, but we'll see how that plays out. And you've got these small fine thread screws. These are what are actually going to be used to mount things like the optical drive. And then we've got 4 additional traditional type screws, which would be used for like a power supply. Our power supply came with its own screws that were black. These screws are silver. The back of the case is black. They're the same screw, it's just a matter of color matching. That's why I picked one over the other. And that's it. The rest of this box is empty. That can be thrown away. That all comes with your case. Now, one of the bags of screws that came with the case contains a whole bunch of these little fine threaded screws with the round heads on them. These are the ones you use for mounting your optical drive. You'll see I've got 3 out. That's because with this particular case, it has a place for putting 1 screw on one side and 2 screws on the other. It's important you use the right screw. These are the fine threaded screws. If you use the coarse threaded screws, you will strip out the holes in the optical drive. We don't really have to use any screws at all because of the mounting system, but I want to make sure that drive is secure, and I'm going to use all 3 of the mounting places, which is why I've got 3 screws. I'll show you how those go in. So on one side of the optical drive, you see there are 2 exposed holes. I don't recommend using them both. That's just overkill. Pick one or the other. I'm going to go ahead and use the bottom one. That side's in. We're going to turn the case around. You'll see we actually have room for 2 more. We don't have to use them both, but I'm going to go ahead and do that since we can. So we'll put one right here and one right there. Now our optical drive is completely secured. That thing is not moving, and it will not break free in shipping, guaranteed. Now the next item we can install in the case is to fill that other hole with our card reader. So here I've got a StarTech card reader. StarTech.com, they make a lot of weird like adapters and converters and stuff. I've had really good luck with the quality of their components, so I'm sure this card reader is going to work great for them. What's the card reader used for? Well, let's say you've got a digital camera. Who doesn't? So how do you get your pictures off your digital camera? You plug it into USB and transfer the pictures while draining your camera battery, and the pictures transfer really slow. What if you could instead just take the memory card out of the camera, plug it into one of these compatible slots, not drain your camera battery, and transfer the pictures off much, much quicker? That's the benefit of a card reader. You could also buy these flash memory cards pretty inexpensively and use them as a form of backup, just like having a USB flash drive, only you'd need a card reader to read it. So this card reader is actually reads 22 different types of cards. Now this card reader supports the SD standard as well as the SDHC and the SDXC standards. If you want to know more about that, you know, you've got Google, you can Google it, and I'm sure there are other YouTube videos that get into more detail about the card readers and the benefits. It also has an additional front USB 2.0 port, so not only are you going to have the 2 up front, but you'll also have this third one. So if you're going to plug, you know, a lot of things into the front of your computer, it just gives you another place to plug something in. Now this is too small to fit into this hole, right? I mean, that's not rocket science, is it? So they sell these adapters, and the whole point of the adapter is to just set that in there, and you mount the card reader into the adapter, and then you mount the adapter into the case. And here's how that's done. Now the card reader's got a little wire tie on it. These wire ties have metal in them right here. So you want to take these wire ties off. Actually, those are pretty much called twist ties. And we'll just go ahead and straighten this cable out. And you'll see on the adapter, it's a little dusty. It's been sitting around for a couple months. But this adapter can be mounted either through holes on the bottom or through holes on the side. Now this card only has 2 holes on the bottom, but we've got multiple holes on the sides. So we're going to go ahead and use the screws to mount it on the sides. These are plastic. If you over tighten them, they will crack and break. So we're going to use a mechanical driver. We're not going to use the electric driver because that's going to over torque and crack, more than likely, the little hold downs here. Remember, it's just a cheap little piece of plastic. One of the things that people will do is they get so anxious to build their system, they don't pay attention to whether or not they put this in right side up or not. So make sure your card reader is right side up. With this card reader, it's pretty simple because it's only got one set of mounting holes. Some of them have one above the other, so it literally could be mounted upside down, but just something to keep in mind. And all we're going to do is we're just going to line that up with the front, right? And then on the sides, the card reader itself came with a little baggie of screws, and we're going to use those screws for the card reader. The reason that's important is if you use screws that are too long, which these are just standard screws, very similar to what we used for just mounting the optical drive. But if you use screws that are too long, there could be a circuit board back there behind the mounting point, and then you could end up hitting that circuit board and grounding it out and ruining the card reader. So not only that, they're also the right thread to use, so you don't have to worry about what thread is it. So we're just going to go ahead and start these screws. Now, because these screws are so short and that mounting point is actually kind of thick, they actually don't go in but a few turns before they start to snug up. Right now, we're just going to get them started, and we're going to put all 4 screws in, 2 on each side. Now that we've got them started, we want to tighten them up a little bit, but if the plastic cracks, you've tightened it too much. Remember, this doesn't have to be airtight. It doesn't have to be like sealed, okay? We just don't want it to come loose, and we don't want it to break free when we're pushing memory cards in and out of it. So you just want to get it right up to snug. And once the screw starts giving you some resistance, stop. That's about the best advice I can give you on that. You have to just use common sense and feel it. If you crack one of them, it's not the end of the world. The other 3 are going to hold it in place, and now you know how far to go, where to stop. That's a heck of a way to learn. Best to just avoid that altogether. Now, installing the card reader is pretty much the same process as we just did for the optical drive. We're going to feed it into the front. However, these mounting holes, there's very small mounting holes right here. There's 2 here, and there's 2 on the end. They're just holes. They're not threaded at all. So this plastic adapter came with self-tapping screws. The case isn't going to come with this type of screw. It's unique to this adapter, and you're going to have to use those screws. And because these holes are smaller than what is normal on a like an optical drive or other typical hardware you would install in the case, this is not going to lock in when we slide it in, because the holes are too small for the toolless device to capture it. So what we're going to have to do is just line this up by hand, and if you're not careful, you can push this all the way in like I just did right there. So you want to make sure that you get that lined up properly. So these are the self-tapping screws that I described that came with that plastic adapter. We're going to need 3 of them, just like the optical drive, 1 on one side, 2 on the other side. So using our mechanical screwdriver, we want to make sure we get the mounting holes lined up properly. And again, use the bottom or the top, don't have to use both. And we want to go ahead and get the screw started. And what's important about this, because it's not locked into position, you want to make sure that it's flush before you tighten it down. So we're just going to get this side started, and we'll turn the case around. And then we'll get these 2 started. Now before you tighten these down, you want to make sure that you've got this lined up and flush the way you want it to look. And you may need to hold it into position with one hand while you tighten it with the other hand. And then we'll go ahead and make sure that the other side gets tightened as well. You can grab on that and pull on it, and you can see I'm adjusting it here. You can see how it's adjusting on the front by using this hand here and grabbing that adapter, the bottom of it, and just kind of pulling on it and lifting up on it. And hold it in that position while you tighten the screw, and it should stay in that position. And it should line up and look nice on the front of the case. Just like that. Now another part that's really easy to install, at least with this Corsair 500R case, is the hard drive, the mechanical drive, which, as I mentioned, is the Seagate Barracuda. It's a 2 terabyte drive. Now with this case, we've got 6 places we can put it. Now we know this fan's going to be blowing over our video card, so we're going to have a lot of heat in this area. And I don't want to put the hard drive on the very bottom because it'll be a little more difficult to cable it. So I think right here is the logical place to put it. There's really no right or wrong answer here. You just really need to think about your wiring, what your computer case is going to look like when it's done. It's really about aesthetics more than anything else. My choice is to go with this third from the bottom tray. You just squeeze these corners, the tray slides out. It is a toolless design. So we're going to take this tray that we just removed, and you can see this tray is pretty flexible. So now all you're going to do is make sure that the front of the drive faces these tabs, and you're going to line up these posts on one side first with the holes on one side of the drive. And you know, this is flexible, so you can bend it to make that fit in there. And again, we're just going to do the one side first. Now that we've got one side in, turn it around and just bend the other side back as much as you need to get those posts into the mounting holes of the drive. So now that drive is securely in this tray, and this tray is just going to slide right back into the case and lock into position. Now there are no options to put screws in there to lock that drive down any more than it's going to lock in, which tells you that that's not going anywhere. Any screws, if they were even offered as an option, would be completely unnecessary and redundant. So that's how easy it is to put the mechanical drive in. Now installing our solid state drive isn't much different, but we do have to use screws to secure it into the drive tray. So we need to pick another drive tray. Now the solid state drive isn't going to run hot, or you know, I don't have to worry about any heat related problems with a solid state drive. So what I think I want to do is I'll use the topmost drive bay here, right, because we got our mechanical drive on the topmost on the bottom drive cage. I'll use the topmost one. Again, it's just for looks. There's no right or wrong answer here. That's just what makes sense to me, or it makes the most sense to me. It may not make any sense to you at all, but do it, place it in any of the 6, really. So for me, I think this is what's going to look best. Now we're going to take our solid state drive out of the box. You know, I'm kind of amused that a lot of manufacturers really use these anti-static bags when they don't need to be used. Kudos to Samsung for just putting the drive in this anti-static plastic. And you know, a lot of places will do that and then have the drive in an anti-static bag. It's a waste of resources. You know, the planet's got so many resources, it probably reduces overall cost, which means your cost and my cost to buy it is less. So kudos to Samsung for that. Anyway, there's our drive. There's our instructions, the Samsung Magician software. We've got some stickers, and all this will go in the at the end of this project. We'll keep it all together and put it in the empty motherboard box when we get there. So we'll just put that all away for right now. Let's get it out of the way. Now here I've got 4 of the same screws that we used for mounting the optical drive. These screws came with the case. They're the shallow, fine threaded screws. If your solid state drive came with its own screws, you can use those. You don't have to worry about the heads not being flat because there's enough room between the drives that won't be an issue. And these screws are going to be used on these holes here on the bottom. You'll see the bottom of the drive has mounting holes. The sides do too, but the sides aren't going to work in there, are they? See what I'm saying? So that's not going to work. So the way you mount a solid state drive into one of these 3.5 inch, basically the way you mount it, this is a 2.5 inch drive, and this is a 3.5 inch drive holder. So they've got these holes down here. Well, how do you know? Does it go in this way? Does it go in, you know, which way does it go? Well, you want your SATA connectors facing opposite of where these tabs are, right? Because you want all your cables towards the back. So what you're going to want to do is line up the holes here with these holes on the bottom. So you've got 4 places here, these silver places. There's little black screws here. These keep the drive together. Leave those alone. These are our mounting holes. That's where you want to use these little screws that we've taken out. So if you look at the drive adapter, if we just kind of hold it upside down, put the front of the drive towards those tabs, and we just want to line the holes up, and you'll see it's going to hang off the edge a little bit, right? Can you see that, how that's going to hang off? That's the way it's supposed to be mounted. So now we'll get our mechanical screwdriver. Always helps to have that magnetic tip. Magnets aren't going to hurt anything with a computer. We're not using floppy disks anymore. Magnets would erase a floppy disk, and that's why they would always tell you to keep magnets away from your computer. But I think we're well past that. I hope you are. Anyway, we're going to get these screws started. This may take 2 hands, one to sort of hold the drive up, and the other one to turn the screwdriver. Once those 2 are in, the drive should be held up close enough then that you don't have to push it up with your hand anymore. And once we've got all 4 started, we can go ahead and tighten them down. Remember, this is plastic. Again, it doesn't have to be airtight. You're not sealing it against water. So just bring it up to snug. You don't want to over tighten it and crack the plastic. That will be bad. Okay. Okay. So now this is what it's going to all look like when it's together. Our SATA and power connector is facing this side. The front of the drive faces the side with the tabs on it. So make sure your drive is right side up, line it back up with the track, and gently slide it into place, and you'll hear it just click or lock into place. Give it a gentle tug there, and you'll see our SATA drive is installed. Now there's one last part we can go ahead and install into the case, and that's the I/O shield. The I/O shield is going to be in the box with your motherboard. So we're going to grab the motherboard box, open that up. Your I/O shield's going to look something like this. This one's painted black, which is cool. Most of the time they're silver in color. It's silver on the back. And for right now, we can just take that out and put the motherboard box off to the side. We don't need that yet. Now installing your I/O shield's pretty straightforward. You can take it out of the bag that it came in here, get rid of that. Now the I/O shield, let's see if I can get you a closer look. Looks like this. You'll see we've got the audio, the holes for the audio that's built into the board is right there. Keyboard and mouse is down here. So this has to go in this direction. It'll go in either way. And if you get it wrong, you'll know because your motherboard won't line up right. So typically your keyboard and mouse indicators are going to be at the top of the case. Unless you're using a different case that uses a different design, this is the most typical way it goes in. It's just a friction mounted fit, so it's just going to line up with the hole and it will just snap into position. And that's all there is to getting the I/O shield installed. Now we've installed everything we can into the case, and now it's time to prep our motherboard. Now there was really no harm of endangering any of the components so far with electrostatic discharge. If there was going to be the potential for electrostatic discharge causing harm to components, these would be the components: your CPU, your RAM, and your motherboard. I think the potential for electrostatic discharge harming a component is overly exaggerated. It all started back in the 70s and 80s when the electronic parts were more prone to being static shocked. Components today aren't as prone to it, and it's still possible. I don't want to dismiss it entirely. But I do believe if you take reasonable steps to avoid it, then you're going to be just fine. It's really nothing to be worried about. So what do I mean when I say reasonable steps? Well, don't work on carpeting. That would be the first thing. If you have to work on carpeting, get yourself an electrostatic strap, an anti-static strap, and connect it to a metal part of the case, the computer case. It can't just be anything metal anywhere. It's got to be the case. The case has got to be unplugged. You just want to be on the same electrical level as the item you're working on. Preferably an unpainted part of the case. If your case is painted like this one is, you could take a little knife or something and find a hidden spot somewhere and just scratch some of the paint off. I think you're being overly cautious if you do that, but you know, you can if you want to. Better yet, don't work on carpet. And the other thing is, handle the parts exactly like I show you how to handle the parts. That way, if there is any static discharge, it will not hurt the parts because you're handling them in a place that will dissipate that and is designed that way. So let's get started by getting a motherboard out of the box. So here we've got the RAM and CPU. I'm just going to set those aside. So a lot of people say, well, what comes with the motherboard? Well, let's open the box and I'll show you. Apart from the I/O shield that we just took out and installed, we've got a software setup guide that comes with this board. We've got the the quick installation guide, which is 1/2 inch thick. That seems real quick, doesn't it? Inside of that was our driver disc and a sticker that says AsRock on it. We've got one set of SATA cables. All right, now this is something to consider. That means there are 2 SATA cables in here, but we have 3 SATA devices. We've got a SATA optical drive, a SATA solid state hard drive, and a SATA mechanical hard drive. So we're going to be short 1 SATA cable. Now I have extras and that's not a problem, but if you don't, you're going to make sure that you order an extra one when you order your parts, or you're not going to be able to plug everything in until you get that other SATA cable, which you'll have to order separately. So if you want to avoid that scenario, pay attention to how many SATA connectors, or SATA cables rather, come with your motherboard. Some motherboards come with 2 pairs, some motherboards come with 1 pair, some motherboards will come with 3 or 4 pairs. A motherboard will always come with at least 1 pair of SATA cables. So in this bag are 2 SATA cables. We're going to need 3. In this anti-static bag here is a bridging connector for the video card. So this motherboard supports NVIDIA SLI, meaning you could take 2 NVIDIA video cards and attach them together, and then each video card does half the work. And in this anti-static bag is what we call a bridge, and it connects the 2 video cards together. We'll just put that aside. We won't be using it on this build, but it could have a purpose in the future, so don't throw it away. Finally, if we lift up this cardboard, in this big anti-static bag is our motherboard. Let's go ahead and get our motherboard out of there. Now this it's kind of nice that AsRock gives us this big anti-static foam pad. I haven't seen that before from other manufacturers. That's a nice touch. And what we're going to do is, you see I'm handling the motherboard by the edges. And you want to avoid touching any of the metal stuff on the bottom of the board. Those contacts down there are pointy and sharp and they will cut you. And you can discharge yourself if you have a static charge on you and harm a component. So as much as possible, handle the board by the edges. Now I'm going to set the board on top of the box. Now why am I putting it on the box? I'm doing that so I don't scratch my countertop. You could work on the anti-static bag. A lot of people think that's not safe. I've got an anti-static Mythbuster video that proves that wrong. The anti-static bag will only work to protect you against anti-static if something's in the bag. So what the manufacturers are telling you is that by placing the board on the bag, you have no anti-static protection. That doesn't mean the bag is conductive. In fact, you can go get a multimeter and check it yourself, and you will verify that that bag is not conductive. But there are a lot of internet trolls out there and such that will want to argue and debate about it. So it's just as easy to build on the board, on the box. So that's what we're going to do here. Okay, so here's a close-up of our motherboard on the box, ready for us to work on. You can see all of our front ports are here. First thing we want to do, there's a piece of plastic sitting on this heatsink. Let's pull that off. You don't want that getting hot and melting and smelling the place up. If you see any sort of plastic like that on your board, go ahead and remove it. First part we're going to install is our CPU. So we're going to grab our CPU box here. Let me move the board back out of the way so you can see what I'm doing. Now this part of the box that has the label on it, that's needed for warranty purposes if you have to send your CPU in. I've really never seen a CPU go bad under warranty. So anyway, this side of the box just has a simple piece of tape that's easier to cut anyway. We're going to go ahead and take that out of there. Now here we've got our heatsink, and the heatsink's got a piece of plastic over it. And that piece of plastic we want to keep on there because there's thermal compound under there. And that thermal compound, you want to keep it clean of any debris, of any contaminants, of finger oils. So we're going to keep that piece of plastic on here. In fact, we aren't even going to use this heatsink. We're using the water cooler system instead. So I'm going to set that aside for right now and just get the CPU out of the box. The CPU, if you just pull this cardboard back like this, there's our CPU in this little plastic container right here. So I'm going to go ahead and set that down. I'm going to close this back up. I'm going to put the heatsink back in this box, just like that. I'm going to put this box back in this box. There's also our instruction manuals in here too. We can take that out. There's a little sticker there. Anyway, so I'm going to put this box back in this box, and I'm going to give this back to the customer. You know, if his water cooling system should fail, or you know, he's got a friend who needs a regular stock heatsink, he'll have it. So this goes back to the customer. We will not use that heatsink. So I'm going to keep the CPU in the plastic for just a moment here, because here is the socket that we're going to plug the CPU into, and it's got a cover on it. And this cover is protecting the little pins that are underneath of it. Anytime that you take a CPU out of this motherboard, if you're going to leave it without a CPU, in other words, if you have to send this motherboard in for repair, this cover has to go back on it. The manufacturer will void your warranty if this board has no CPU in it and does not have the cover on it. So you either have a CPU in the socket or the cover, one or the other. It's for that reason I recommend you hold on to this cover. Again, for any warranty purposes, you're going to want to take your CPU out, put the cover back on, should you need to send this into the manufacturer for warranty. Now to install your CPU, there's a little retention lever here. Let's see if I can turn this around and give you a different look. There's a retention lever right here, and if you push down on it and away, it'll come up and it's going to lift that whole section up. Now on most motherboards, that just comes straight back, but on this board, this heatsink gets in the way, so I'm going to have to help it out with my finger here and just go ahead and lift that up. Now you do not want to touch any of those little pins. They are exceptionally delicate. Now we're going to take our CPU, remove it from the plastic. There are two little indentations for you to grab it by the sides. Now the CPU is not delicate. I am not handling it with care because I'm worried about breaking it. I'm handling it with care because I'm worried about electrostatic discharge. I don't want to touch any of those little bottom landings, those are what are called landings on the bottom. And I don't want my finger oils on the top of it that could interfere with the thermal compound of the cooling system we put on. Now you'll see the CPU has little grooves. There's a groove on this side here, and there's a groove on this side here. And that's going to line up with the little notches in the socket. In general, if you're not certain which way it goes in, don't force it. You're basically going to just set it very gently down into place. And most motherboards, at least every motherboard I've worked on in the last, well, 2 years, the writing of the CPU always faces the same writing on the board. So that's one way to tell. Take your time, don't force anything, it just sets in there very gently. Now we're going to lower this cover, and you see this cover's got like a little hook on it here, and it's going to go underneath what almost looks like a little forklift, and there's a little screw here, and the whole purpose of that screw isn't to hold any parts to the motherboard. It's just that this is going to go underneath that screw, right? And as we slide it forward, you want to make sure that that gets underneath that screw. And then watch this cover as I lower the CPU retention lever down. The little cover popped itself right off. Go ahead and remove that and put this away. And that's pretty much what the warning says about that, what I already told you. If you take the CPU out, you got to put the cover back on, unless you're putting another CPU right back in. Now normally the next step would be to install our heatsink and fan, but because we're using the water cooler system, we won't get to that till after the board's been mounted into the case. So this build's a little different in that respect. Why are we using the water cooler system as opposed to the stock cooler? There is nothing wrong with the stock cooler unless you want to try and overclock the system, meaning you're going to try and push it to run faster than it was designed to run. And when you do that, you take your own risks. You know, the system could crash, you could burn up parts, things can overheat, and heat is really the enemy, and water cooling systems are better at dissipating the heat. However, if you have no plans on overclocking, the stock fan that comes with the CPU, whether it's Intel or AMD, those are the fans you should be using. You're just wasting money if you buy a third-party fan, in my opinion, without any intention to overclock. So the next thing we can do is install our RAM. So if I turn the board around here, you'll see we've got the sockets for RAM here. And we're just going to go ahead and pull these little tabs back on all 4 of the sockets. Now we've only got 2 RAM modules, so how do we know which 2 of these 4 memory sockets to use? Well, if you've watched my other videos, there's usually etchings on the board that tell you slot 1, slot 2, slot 3, slot 4. And usually it's every other slot, starting with the one closest to the CPU. On this board, there is a small etching that says DDR3A1 and DDR3A2. So that means this is A1, this is A2, this is B1, and this is B2. That's a little confusing, isn't it? Because it might imply that if you're only going to install 2 RAM modules, you put them both in A or put them both in B, but that would be wrong. You actually want to start with A1 and B1 if you have 1 pair of memory, and then A2 and B2 for a second set of memory. So because we're running 2 memory modules, they're going to go in A1 and B1. A1 again is closest to the CPU, then there's A2, which we're going to skip, and then there's B1. So if you compare this to other videos, it's going into the same sockets. They've just renamed them, and in my opinion, made it a little more confusing than it needed to be. And you can always refer to your motherboard installation manual if you're concerned or still confused over which sockets to use. When you use memory in pairs, it's important for dual channel memory to work reliably that you have the exact same brand, speed, model, size. It's got to be identical. And that's why these are sold as a set. So we're going to just open this package up. And to take the memory out, I'm just going to push on the back of the package here and get one of the corners up. Now, what's on this memory is something called a heat spreader. And you can hold the memory safely anywhere on this heat spreader. The memory has a little notch in it. You do not want to touch any of the gold area down here. So you want to hold the memory by the edges or by this heat spreader. There's no worry of electrostatic discharge there. Where that notch is, you want to line up with the notch on the socket. So orient that in the right direction, and it's going to fit straight into a track like so, and it shouldn't require any force. Now, to fully seat this, I use my thumbs, and I just push down one corner and then the other corner, and generally you'll hear it click into place. That one was kind of quiet, but it's in there. And this memory has little things poking up on the sides, which I don't know what they were thinking when they did that. So actually, upon closer inspection, G.SKILL calls this RAM Sniper. And if you look, there's an outline of a sniper rifle in the heat spreader. And these parts that are sticking up are supposed to be the sights on the rifle. Now, that makes the RAM harder to install because this pokes your finger when you're trying to push down on it. But I guess that's what they're doing for the looks, which of course no one's ever going to see anyway. But at least it explains why it's there, even if it's a stupid reason. But anyway, we'll grab the other memory module. That's just the sound of the plastic it came out of, not the memory module. And we're going to, again, the same direction. We're going to not use the next socket, right? We're going to skip a socket, and then we're going to go into what is called socket B1. Again, slide it in the track. Shouldn't require any force. And then push in one side, then the other side. Then these remaining tabs that are still open, we can go ahead and just close those up for right now. And now our motherboard is ready to install in our case. Now to install our motherboard into our case, if you remember, I put the water cooler in there just to get it out of the way, but now that water cooler is going to get in our way. So I need to go ahead and just take this water cooler out for right now. Just set this aside, because these pipes are going to get in the way. Not that we couldn't do it with it in there, but it's just going to be easier if we go ahead and just take it out right now, and we'll put that away. I can just go ahead and put that back up there so I don't damage it or lose it. And then the next step will be to just lay the case down onto its side. And then make sure all your cabling is out of the way of this bottom tray. And this is really important. You want to make sure where these little standoffs are, that's going to line up with a hole in the motherboard. If the standoff hits the back of the board where there's a circuit, in other words, where there's no mounting hole, you ground the whole board out and could totally damage the board. So what we need to do is, normally at this point I would pick the motherboard up by the heatsink. But because I don't have any heatsink on it right now, I've got to pick the board up by the edges, and you'll see I'm also holding it by these ports. Now, these ports are easily broken off too, so really got to handle this with care. If you're using the stock heatsink, you can go ahead and pick it up by the heatsink as I've shown on other videos. And what I want to do is just gently set the board in and see that the standoffs that are in there are going to line up with what we already have with the holes in the board. And what I'm seeing is I've got a mounting hole here, 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 and here, right? So that's 2, 4, 6, there's 7 mounting holes. So I know there are 7 mounting holes on this board. I want to make sure there are 7 standoffs underneath of it, not 6 and not 8. So again, we'll gently take the board out, set it back on the box for right now, and make sure I've got 7. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that's right. So he's already put the standoffs in, or the case came like that. Again, the way I got the computer was this way. I'm assuming he didn't put the standoffs in because he didn't get this far in the build process, and that the case came out of the box this way. It's a little disadvantage I have since this is the first time working with this case. I can't tell you definitively, but what I can tell you is if any of these standoffs were in the wrong spot, if there were more, let's say there was a standoff here, this would hit the back of the board and would ground us out. We'd have to remove that and put it away. So this is a 5mm socket that's just on a regular ratcheting screwdriver, and you don't want to tighten those too much that they strip out, but when you're putting them in, you want to get them just a little past snug. And if you take them out, if you have no use for them today, I mean, don't just throw them away or put them somewhere where you can't find them, because you might need them in the future. So I recommend you take out any you don't need and put them back in the bag with the screws that came with the board, and put all that away in case you do need it in the future. So since we know this is going to line up, we're going to take our board again. And again, you'll see the way I'm handling the board. I'm holding it here by these plastic PCI ports. I'm holding it as much as possible by the edge. I will grab it and adjust it by the I/O ports here. Now this heat shield, this I/O shield rather, has little grounding tabs on it. At least has one. And I want to make sure that little grounding tab doesn't go inside of that HDMI port that's built into this board, or it'll ground itself out. And I've discussed this in more detail in past videos. So basically what I'm saying is you want to look on this other side and make sure that all of the ports line up properly with the holes, and that if there are grounding straps, that those grounding straps are not bending and then blocking or getting inside of your port. They need to sit on the outside of the port. If you don't discover that now, that means after you've got everything screwed down and mounted in place, you have to take it all back apart again. So now's the time to just, you see I'm kind of pushing on that board in this direction to make sure that that's flush against the side of the case. Now once you've ensured that all your ports are lined up correctly here on the I/O shield, that your board is seated in the proper position, we can go ahead and secure it. Using the screws that came with the case, we're going to grab 7 of the coarse thread screws that have the flat head on them here. And we've got 7 mounting ports, or 7 mounting holes, 7 standoffs. We're going to need 7 screws. I would recommend you use a mechanical screwdriver and just get the screws started. It doesn't matter what order you use. Now with all 7 screws started, go ahead and tighten them all down. And you want to take them just a little past snug. Again, you don't want to over tighten them, because then when you go to unscrew them, you could back out the standoff along with it, and that makes the board a lot harder to get out. And count them off when you're doing it to make sure that you haven't missed any. So this is 5, this is 6, and this is 7. And once again, you don't have to do them in a cross pattern. You can if you want to. As I mentioned, it's a good habit to get into anyway. It doesn't hurt anything, but you don't want to lose count. And if you do, just go back and check them again, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. With our motherboard now securely in place, we can go ahead and bring the case back up onto its feet. And now we get to install our water cooler. Now normally this is the part where I bring out the box and remove the parts from the box and throw the box and the instructions around. But because this was already removed from the box and I don't have it, well, we're just going to skip that part and go right to the parts that are in the box. I had the water cooler in the case just to keep it out of the way. So let's take it out. I'm just going to put it right back in again, but it really didn't need to be in there at this point, just to show a complete water cooler install. It was just in there so I didn't damage the radiator here. This is just like a radiator on a car, and when these little fins get bent, well, it doesn't hurt much, but if you bend enough of them, it will impede the cooling ability of the water cooler. So by just keeping it in the case, it was just keeping it out of the way so that it wouldn't get damaged. But as you can see, this case is made for this water cooler. It's got 2 areas there for the fans to go, and of course the water cooler and the case are both made by Corsair, and that always helps to ensure that it's going to fit right. So all I'm going to do here is just put it right back in. Right, we're just going to pretend like it wasn't in there, and I want it so that the water cooling tubes are closest to the back of the case, and I want to set the radiator down here. Now we could also mount the radiator in from the inside and then put the fans on top, and then additionally put 2 more fans on the bottom of the radiator. That's a lot of fans. Basically you would have 2 fans pushing air through the radiator and 2 fans pulling air from the radiator. So all the fans are blowing the same direction, let's say. So we're not going to do that because it's overkill. Corsair recommends, if given a choice between a push or a pull configuration, in other words, to pull air through the radiator or to push air through the radiator, they say there's better performance by pushing air through the radiator. So for that, we place the radiator here on top of the case, and we've got some parts here that we need to install. We're going to leave the top of the case off for right now. Now we're not going to need to put any screws in from the top, because when we secure the fans to the bottom, the fans are actually going to go through the case and into the bottom of the radiator, and that is going to both secure the radiator to the case and the fan to the case at the same time using the same screw. So let me give you a close-up of that and show you how that's done. Now when we install our fans, make sure that the spinning part of the fan, this part here, is going to be facing down towards the inside of the case. And the part here that doesn't spin, see when the fan spins, see how the center doesn't move? That air is going to be blowing out that way. So we want to make sure we're pushing air through the radiator. I want to orient the cable. The fan can go in any direction as far as rotation goes. But I want to make sure that the cable is going to look nice once it's in place. So I think the cable is going to look best over to the side. Do your best to line up the radiator on top with the holes, and you'll have to just kind of finesse it into place as you do it here. This is very difficult to do while filming. I can tell you that now, or at least trying to give you a good camera angle where you can see what I'm doing. I just want to get that screw right there started with by hand. I'm going to use my mechanical driver to just turn it a little bit. Just to hold that fan in so I can let it go. Then I want to go to the opposite corner. And I want to try and get that lined up properly with the radiator. And give yourself patience when you do this. Give yourself time. You can kind of feel it. When you've got the screw lined up with the hole, you'll feel it go into the recess. And then just go ahead and turn the screw a bit more just to make sure it's well in there. But we don't want to tighten them down just yet. And then we'll go ahead and do the two remaining. And you'll see that the screw back here, this one back in the corner, is a little difficult to get to. It's right by the RAM and this heatsink here. However, we can still get in there. On some cases, in some water coolers, it makes sense to install a water cooler, or at least the radiator first. We certainly could have installed the radiator first in this design. I've actually never installed this radiator into this case. In fact, I've never worked with this case before. If I had to do it all over again, I don't know. I mean, if I would have installed the radiator first, I still would have had these big water pipes hanging down in the way of installing the motherboard. So one way or another, you're going to be working around stuff. And so far, at least with this fan, we're okay. We can get around everything we need to get around with a regular handheld screwdriver. If you find that it's, you know, depending on what motherboard you've got, what case you've got, what water cooler you've got, if you find it's too tight, don't cut corners. Take your time, okay? So if you have to pull your motherboard out in order to get to something, then that's the right way to do it. You know, don't rush through it. Enjoy your build. Now, I'm tightening these screws down, but I don't want to tighten them down too tight. I just want them snug. And that fan is in. So now we're going to do the same thing with the next fan. Again, we've got to consider which way we want the wire to go. And I'm thinking these wires, we want the fan turned in this direction. I think this wire is going to be best coming off. I don't know. There? No. There? Yeah, you know, we can do that. Let's do that. All right, so that's going to be the direction of the wire that's coming out that's going to power the fan. We'll start with the screw that's easiest to get to first. You guys should try doing this in filming. This is this is a real joy, let me tell you. Hang that right there. All right, get the one in the opposite corner going. When you line up the screws in opposite corners, the other screws should line up with the holes automatically, right? So if I go to these other ones now, I should be able to just push them straight up. It should just line up, and it does. I like it when a plan comes together. Now this last one here in the corner is going to be another tight one to get to. See how that ram's kind of in the way? So you know what the right thing to do is, right? The right thing to do here is to just temporarily take the ram out. Don't try and force your screwdriver around something that's just so simple and takes 2 seconds to just take out. put your screw in, right? Or whatever you need to do, and then put the part back in. Don't struggle. Now you just want to make sure all the screws are snug. Sometimes when you screw down some screws, other ones might loosen up because of the tension that's being put on it in different places. So make sure all your screws are snug. And these are. And we can go ahead and put our RAM right back in. Remember how we did that, right? Line it up with the socket, push one corner, then the other corner. Now that we've got the fans mounted to the radiator, that radiator's not coming out. I guess you can't really see it that way. That radiator's locked in. The screws that hold the fans in are also, screwed into the radiator. So those screws are holding that radiator in. And what that means is we can put the top back on and leave it on. We shouldn't need to take that top off anymore. So just put that one side in first and then click that down into place. Now the next step in our build is to install our water block. So we're going to start by using the part that came with the water block, which is the support bracket. This goes behind the motherboard. And let's just get you a close-up of that and show you how that goes on. Okay, so here's a real good close-up of the back of the motherboard. We can see it through the hole cut in the back of the case. This metal plate right here is actually the support for the CPU socket. And this support bracket, if I can get on the camera, there it is, needs to fit through these holes. You'll see there's a number of holes there. And you'll see that on the support bracket, these adjust to fit to different socket types. And you'll also notice, if you look very closely, the support bracket, if you look at this part here, notice how it's all perfectly square along three sides. But on one side, right there, it's got little grooves cut out in the corners. So that goes around, see these two screws? There's a screw here, screw here. It's gonna hug those two screws. And all we're gonna do at this point is just line up these little tabs and push them through the holes. And if you wonder which holes do I use, you'll only be able to use one set of holes. It will only line up with one set. So you can't really do it wrong. Just make sure you get all four in there. Of course, nothing is holding this in right now. So we very gently go to the other side of the computer. We can rotate this. Now, if you look really closely, you can see the little nubs sticking out here, and they're coming through the holes on the motherboard that have white circles around them, right in those four corners. And like I said, nothing's holding that in. It could just drop right out. So you've got to be real gentle with it at this point, unless you have three arms. Now the H100i water cooler kit came with a bunch of different types of screws and standoffs and these thumb screws. Now the standoffs we're using look like this. These are for the socket 1155, which we're using. They have a different standoff for the socket 2011. And then they all use these thumb screws. Now you want to be really careful and tighten these down by mechanical screwdriver or by hand when you do it, because if you're a dummy and you do what I did and I use my electric screwdriver, you can see I busted the end of that standoff off with the end of the thumb screw right there. So those two parts are no longer usable, and you need to have four in order to apply equal pressure. So in other words, I could not continue this build until I got that replaced. So ignore these thumb screws for right now. We don't need them yet. We're going to start with these four standoffs. And all we're going to do with each of these standoffs, and it doesn't matter which end of the standoff you use, I'm going to put my hand back behind this plate, very careful to touch the plate, not the back of the motherboard, and just hold it into position while I start each standoff here. We're going to go ahead and we can actually screw them all the way down. They're going to stay loose, and we need to do this with all four standoffs, one in each corner. Now make sure these four standoffs are as tight as you can get them with your fingers. Now you'll see it's still going to move around back and forth. There's still some play in them, and that's okay. That's going to tighten up once we put the water block on. Now normally at this point we would just simply mount the water block to the CPU. But this block, when it was new, you see it came with thermal compound, a thermal paste already on it. But because we've used it once, you can only use the thermal paste once. Once you've removed it off the CPU, you need to clean it off, clean the CPU off, and use fresh thermal compound. So I've done that, I've cleaned them both off, and I realize that kind of looks dark and stuff, but believe it or not, that's clean. I can barely get it on the camera. There you go. But just using Q-tip and alcohol, or rubbing alcohol. Also, same thing with the CPU. I had a different heat sink on that CPU temporarily, and I've done my best to get all the thermal compound off of it and make the CPU look nice and clean again. If you don't have access to Q-tips and rubbing alcohol or denatured alcohol, I'll tell you another good thing you can use. And I've never heard anybody else recommend this, so let's see what kind of controversy I cause. You can get a camera cleaning kit, a camera lens cleaning kit, and it'll come with a little bottle of that rubbing alcohol, and it'll come with little cleaning papers. And you can use those cleaning papers and alcohol to get a real nice finish on your CPU, make sure it's nice and clean. And of course you can use that on the end of the water block too. You want both surfaces as clean as possible before you begin. Now the next point of controversy is how to put the thermal compound on. Well, there's a lot of talk about if you spread the thermal compound and then put the heatsink on, it'll create bubbles. There's this talk about putting a pea-sized drop, but you know, if you put a pea-sized drop, how do you know if you put too little on? You'd have to take the heatsink off to look at it if you didn't put enough on. If you put too much on, it'll ooze over the sides, and if you're using a conductive thermal compound, such as I am here, this is Arctic Silver 5, which is a pretty popular thermal compound. It can ooze out the sides and short things out. So in my opinion, the best way to apply thermal compound is to put a nice, fine, even layer across the entire surface of the CPU. Not concentrating in the middle, just everything equally spread out as evenly as possible. Now this little Arctic Silver 5 tube that you buy is probably good for 8 or 9 applications, maybe more than that. So you don't go anywhere near to using this whole tube. What I'm going to do, and remember this case is upright, it would probably be better if it was lying down at this point. But I'm going to take the lid off of this thermal compound, and again, only applying it to the CPU. I'm just going to put a little dab of it on there, just like that. And the next thing I'm going to do, again, is another thing I haven't seen anybody do on either on YouTube videos or others, and that is to take a piece of Scotch tape. Now you might want to let it roll, you know, one full rotation to make sure you get a nice clean piece, as I've got here, of regular old Scotch tape. I can use the edge of my finger here to adjust that tape onto my finger, but I don't want to touch the top of the tape. Okay, I can touch the back of it all I want. And what I want to do is use my finger with the tape to spread that out. And again, the thinner, the better. We want this to be the thinnest layer of thermal compound. Too much thermal compound will cause a reduction in the ability of it to transfer the heat. It'll have the exact opposite effect of what you want it to do. So what I want to do is make sure that I hit every part of the CPU, the top of the CPU, that none of the CPU can be seen. It's all got to be hidden behind this thermal compound. And you can see you got a nice even layer. We didn't have to get our finger dirty. The oils on your skin will actually contaminate the thermal compound, and that will affect its efficacy and how well it works. So let me go ahead and just take this tape off my finger here and throw that away. That's a nice clean way to do it. Now I realize there's some people out there that say, yeah, but when you put your water block on now there's going to be air bubbles in there. Don't believe that for a second, that that's going to make any difference whatsoever. It's not an airtight system, so theoretically air could get in from the sides, air can come out from the sides, and when thermal paste heats up, it expands. And in all the tests that I have seen, like for example, there's a guy got a video and he's pushing a plate of glass down as if it's a CPU onto thermal compound. He's not putting enough pressure onto that plate of glass that would simulate the amount of pressure that the water block's going to have on top of the CPU. And further, he's not turning the CPU on and bringing it up to like 70 degrees Celsius to see how that thermal compound expands. And And the idea is that, well, the bubbles expand too, but you really need to do your own testing. At some point, you need to stop believing what you see on YouTube and try it yourself. Put it on this way, do the P size drop, try other techniques, and then go look at the temperature difference of your computer. Keeping in mind that when you check it, if your room temperature changes, it throws off your reading. So like if you, for example, were to put a little P size drop on and put your CPU on, and you did that in the morning, and then in the afternoon you took it off and you did this, you cleaned it and you did my technique, and now the sun's up and it's noon and the room you're in's a little warmer, it's not going to be an accurate resulting test. Keep that in mind when you're running your test, but I think you'll find it makes no difference whatsoever. The only exception that I would give is if you were running some kind of super duper overclock system with some proprietary type cooling system. But again, you wouldn't need to be watching my video to see how to install this if you already knew how to do that. So for everyday folks like me and you, overclocking or not, that, in my 25 years plus of experience, that's how you apply thermal compound. And now we've got the water block to put on. So now the water block, initially when this came out of the box, this cable, if I can get this on camera, this cable was not connected. Right here, there's a little place up here for the cable. So I've already connected that, and out of the box this bracket wasn't on. So the bracket just slides over the top. I can't take the bracket off now because the cable's blocking that. But that's when this water block comes out of the box, typically you don't put this cable on yet, but you would put this metal bracket on at this point. Now I'm going to choose to install this with the Corsair logo facing upright, which is kind of hard to film and show you because the water tubes are in the way. But that whole front area, this all lights up, and you can change the colors on it and everything with the Corsair software. At least on the H100i it does. So what we're going to do is just line that up very easily with those standoffs that we just put on. And we're going to grab a thumb screw and tighten these thumb screws, first of all by hand. And it's good on this to do opposite corners. Now it's a bit of a tight squeeze for me to get my hand in down here. Also, it's not really giving you a very good view either. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and use my mechanical screwdriver. And if I can find the camera, there it is. I'll put one of the thumb screws on the end of the mechanical screwdriver, and then we'll get that going on the standoff in the opposite corner. And again, we just want to get them started right now. As soon as it starts to show a little resistance, that's where I stop. Now it doesn't matter what order you do the next two screws, because no matter how you do them, they're going to be opposites. And I'll start here on the bottom left. Now before you go tightening these down, just make sure everything looks and feels flush, that nothing's gotten caught underneath, that the screws are coming through the holes properly and preferably not on an angle, that everything's kind of square on. And if so, just pick a screw and start to tighten it down. And you want to tighten that past snug. How far past snug? Well, that's a difficult question for me to answer because I've already busted the head off of one of these, and you don't want to do that. It's going to ruin your whole day. There's some things you can get around and continue your build with, but when you break those off, believe me, that's bad times. So we just want to make sure we get those reasonably tight. I guess that would be the best way I could explain it, because we want the two surfaces, the bottom of this water cooler pump and the top of the CPU, we want those to be as tight as possible and let that thermal compound do its job. And we can grab that now, and you can see, you remember there used to be some play in it. There's no play in that now. That thing is on there. It's not going anywhere. Now this plug I referred to earlier that I said you had to plug in, that this was already plugged in. This is where we're going to connect our two fans that are up here on the radiator. So these are just 3-pin fans. Although why they give us a 4-pin fan connector and give us 3-pin fans, I'm not quite sure. But they only go on one way. As you can see, there's a little groove and notch, and that just lines up, and then the extra pin just hangs out. So there's one of our fans hooked up, and we'll grab the other power cable here for the other fan. And same as the other one, it's going to line up 3 of the pins with the 4. You'll see the other side, how you know how that goes on, because there's a little track that fits in a groove. And now that's hooked up our heat pump and our CPU fans that are blowing through the radiator above. And then on the other cable, we've got 2 more connectors here. This is another cable that's coming out of the CPU. Now this cable is not a removable cable. This one actually comes out of the box this way. And we've got a SATA power connector, and that's going to power the water pump. And then we've got this 1 wire on this 3-pin connector, and that's going to go right up here at the top where it says CPU fan. At the top of the board, you'll see there's CPU fan 1, power fan 1, and CPU fan 2. Now the CPU fan is a 4-pin fan connector, and once again, Corsair gives us a 3-pin connector, which goes on the same as the other fans I just showed you, and that just connects on, as simple as that. Now you see there's still 1 cable left that we haven't plugged in. This is actually SATA power. This powers the pump. The pump's inside of the heatsink here that pumps the fluid through the radiator, and that's how it gets its power to power the pump. So when we hook up our power cables to everything, we got to make sure that we remember to plug a power cable into this as well. Finally, there's this one last cable, and it's about a 26-inch long cable that the Corsair H100i cooler comes with. And what this is a USB connector on one end and then a typical USB 2.0 header on the other end. You see, the Corsair Link software that works with the H100i enables you to control the fan speeds, monitor the temps, and even monitor and change the colors on the cooler, whether you want it to be one solid color or have it rotate through all the colors. That's all done through their Corsair Link software. But without this USB cable hooked up, you won't be able to do any of that. So it's a pretty important cable to have. Now I can't really get the camera on the right angle for you to be able to see the plug-in up here, the USB plug-in that's on the side, because the case is in the way. But mark my word for it, it's just right up here. And we're going to take this end of the cable, and it's going to go with the cable facing up like this. And that's just going to plug in. We just have to feel for the connector. Right there is where it plugs in. Just push that all the way on. Now the other end of this cable we can run up into the top left corner through the hole in the back and run it behind the motherboard. We can run the cable through the hole over the power supply. You'll see it's the standard USB 2 cable that has the 1 pin missing. So it's going to go into either of these 2 ports here. And I'm just going to plug it in right there, just like that. And now's as good a time as any to go ahead and hook up all of our power cables. Now to hook up our power supply cabling, I've got all the cables that came with our power supply. Remember they were in that bag that I love so much? This is all of them. Now we're not going to use all of them. They just give you a lot because they don't know what hardware you have and how many power cables you're going to need. Now I'm not even sure which of these we need just yet, but I do know that we need this big one because that's going to hook up to the motherboard. And there's one that's going to say CPU on the side, and it's an 8-pin connector. Right here, it says CPU on the side. These 2 are going to go from the power supply to the motherboard. So let's start there. So we're going to start with the largest cable. And you can see one end of it has a very large 24-pin connector. And then the opposite end has these 2 connectors that go on the back of the power supply. So let's go ahead and remove the twist tie. And the part that goes to the motherboard is this one large connector here, and it's got a clip on one side, so it only goes on one way. And here on the motherboard you can actually feel a ridge where that clip is going to hook onto. We can just go ahead and push that right on there, and you can give it a gentle tug, make sure that that's in completely. Now one of the things I mentioned earlier that I don't like about the Seasonic power supply is the inconsistency of the writing. you'll see that this sticker here is right side up and we can read it. But where we need to plug these connectors in the back, all the writing faces the other way. So it appears that I'm filming this upside down, when in fact, this is right side up. Now if you look closely at the connectors, you'll see they've got little brackets that are painted that kind of show you which connectors go together. And there's also little holes that the clips are going to fit in. And you'll see this says CPU PCIe up here, and this one down here says IDE SATA, or SATA down here. And the ones at the very end that are the hardest to see say MB or motherboard, and you'll see there's each one in the corner says that. So we're going to take the connector, obviously, that fits. So the large connector goes to the bottom. Make sure that that clips into place. And then the smaller connector is just going to go right above that. And then give those a light tug, make sure that they're in all the way. Now for you beginners out there that wonder what cable management means, you see how we just ran this cable, and you see how it just kind of hangs out there and it's kind of ugly, and it's potentially possible that this could impede the airflow, although it's not going to impede it much. It's mostly for looks that people talk about cable management. And this case comes with these little grommeted holes here that I mentioned earlier that are designed for cable management. So what does that mean? Well, that means we can take this cable that we just hooked up. If I disconnect it from the motherboard here, I can run it back through this grommeted hole here, right? We can bring that all the way around to the other side, back behind the motherboard. And then we can bring it back up through this grommeted hole right up here. And then we can go ahead and plug that right back in. And look how much cleaner our cabling now looks. You don't even see that cable anymore, right? So as we hook up other cables, we're going to use these grommeted holes that are closest to each end of the cable to keep our computer looking as clean as possible on the inside. That'll help improve the airflow, and it just looks a lot better. And there's no right or wrong way to do it. You just do what looks best to you, or you don't even have to do it at all. Now the next power cable we're going to hook up says CPU on it right there. There it is. And that's going to go way up here in this corner. So again, using the grommeted holes here, we can go ahead and start this cable out here. We'll bring it through. And we want to bring it all the way up. There's a small hole in the back of this case that we can bring this power cable up through. Now once we've got that through, just like the larger cable, it's got a clip on one side. That clip faces towards the outer edge of the motherboard. It can only go on one way. And then we just simply push that right into position. You may hear it click, you may not. You just have to sort of give it a gentle tug to make sure that the clip is secured onto something. Now the opposite end of this cable can actually plug into any of these top ports here. Of course, it's going to make the most sense to plug it in next to our other motherboard cable. So make sure we orient that in the right direction. Line it up. And it just plugs right on. Now with our motherboard power hooked up, we can now hook up power to the hard drives and the optical drive and the heatsink. Now we know we're going to need the SATA connectors for those. So we're going to need a SATA connector for the optical drive, a SATA connector for the solid state drive, a SATA connector for the hard drive, and a SATA connector for the heatsink. So that's 4 SATA connectors. So as I look at what's remaining of these cables, I see here's a cable that's got SATA connectors on it. And I just want to pull out the ones that have the SATA connectors on them. And it looks like we've got 3 cables here that have SATA connectors on them. I'm not sure if we're going to need to use all 3 cables. It really doesn't matter how many of the power connectors you use on one cable. If the power connector fits, you can use it. And if the power connector reaches, and that's what I'm thinking about right now, is if I can use the same power cable for more than one thing will determine how many of these power cables I need, and that's going to depend on if the power cable will reach. As you can see, it's another thing to consider when you're deciding which trays you want to put your hard drives in, is whether or not you'll be able to utilize the same cable, or if that's even important to you. But it also depends how many hard drives you've got, how far away they are from each other, how many power connectors you have per cable. For example, 2 of these power cables have 4 SATA connectors on each cable, and this power cable only has 2 SATA connectors on it. And that's going to vary based on the power supply make and model that you have, and again, how many hard drives you have, and again, how important the look of the cabling is. Or it may be a necessity, if you just don't have enough cable, SATA connectors, that you have to put your hard drives close together because you have to accommodate the cabling, which means, in my opinion, you didn't get the right power supply. Most people are only going to have 1 hard drive and 1 optical drive, and this really isn't going to be a problem. But because we've got the additional SATA cable that's needed for the additional hard drive, because we've got 2 hard drives, right? We've got the solid state drive and the mechanical drive, and we need an additional SATA cable to drive the heat pump on the water cooler. So if you're going with a system like this, it's something to consider when you're placing your order for your power supply. And not only that you have the amount of wattage that you need, but also that you have the number of connectors you're going to need, that they're going to be spaced out far enough and be able to reach where you need them to reach. It's that reason that I recommend, if you're building your very first computer, don't go all out with a water cooling system and multiple drives. You know, that you're going to really challenge yourself. If you just stick with a basic build, or you follow a build exactly as I do it, then you're going to be just fine. So again, that really, the cabling stuff, having the right power connectors and the placement of the drives really only applies, and I really want to emphasize this, it really only applies to somebody who is building a more unusual system. Because a common system, as I mentioned, is going to have 1 hard drive, 1 optical drive. So once you get into the water cooling, once you start getting into multiple drives, RAID configurations and things like that, in general, I would hope that you've already built a basic computer first, and so you have some base knowledge to go off of when you do that next build. Either that, or as I previously mentioned, if you're doing something like this build here, that you're buying the exact same parts and following exactly along with me to ensure that you won't get in over your head or get the wrong parts or worry about what's compatible with what, or if the cables are long enough, etc., etc. So we're going to start by hooking up power to our hard drives. We've got our solid state drive here, our mechanical drive here. I've gone ahead and taken one of the cables and taken the twist tie off of it that has the 4 SATA connectors on it. I'm going to take the end SATA connector and put it on the topmost drive. Again, we're looking at having the cleanest wiring possible, right? And that's just going to push straight on. And you can see that the next connector in line is actually going to reach perfectly, but these cables, you see these fan cables are going to get trapped in between. So again, to keep the cabling as clean as possible, I'm going to go ahead and just thread around those, and this connector is just going to pop right on like this. Now we're going to take the other end of this cable, and I want to run it right in here to this grommet, and then we'll wire tie this stuff up back here a little later on and make sure our cabling is nice and clean. Now to hook up the other end of our cable, we can use any of the ports down here on the bottom of the power supply where it says peripheral, IDE, or SATA. So really any of these are going to work just fine. You cannot plug this cable into an incompatible port. It simply won't plug in. So you don't have to worry about plugging it in the right place. However, if you just read what's there, you can be confident you are plugging it in the right place. And to keep our cabling as clean as possible, and for no other reason than that, I'm going to plug in right over here next to our other cables. Keep all the cables grouped together. Next, I'm going to take the other cable that's got the 4 SATA connectors on it, and I'm going to plug that into the back of the optical drive. And then I'm going to run this cable through this top grommet all the way through the back. Now we don't want to feed all this cable to the back, because remember, we still have that one last SATA connector to hook up for our water cooler. So I'll take the second to last cable here, the next one in line, again just to keep the cabling as clean as possible, and we'll go ahead and connect that on so our water pump now has power, and then feed any excess through to the back. Unfortunately, this cable they give us is pretty short, and we'll have to just kind of wire tie that and make it look nice, and make sure that it doesn't lay over the memory or anything. You want to keep it away from, not, you don't want it to touch anything where it could potentially rub against something and cut the wire and short out. So of course we're going to take the opposite end of this cable now. It's going to run exactly through the same place that we did the last one. Now the opposite end of our cable, once again, is going to plug into any of the ports along the bottom of the power supply. And once again, for the same reason of keeping our cabling as clean as possible, I'm going to go ahead and plug it into the next port that's available. So I'm not skipping any. And that keeps our cabling looking nice and neat. Now in addition to those power connectors, there are a couple of fans on the front of the case, and those have to have power as well. So part of these cables that are coming in from the front bezel are two connectors. One is a little 3-pin connector here. We aren't going to use this one, but we will need to hook power up to those fans. And to do that, we need a regular, what's called a Molex connector. So with our power supply, we've got one of the cables that, actually there's two cables that have the Molex connectors, but this one appeared to be shorter, and I want to use one that's as short as possible. And we'll just remove the twist tie here. Now because of the way this cable is designed, in order to keep the cabling as clean as possible, I'm going to use the middle connector and then just wire tie this other connector back. And that's only going to fit on one way. And again, to keep our cabling clean, we can actually push that out to the back if we want to. And just like the last two connectors that we hooked up, this connector will also plug in down here at any of the ports on the bottom. And again, I'm just using the next one over. Keeps our cabling looking nice and clean. Now the next thing we can hook up is our rear exhaust fan. And we want to make sure we get those twist ties off, right? It's got a little twist tie on it. It's got metal in it. If the metal should, if that twist tie should come off when you're moving the computer around or whatever, it could short out against something inside the computer. So make sure you remove all these twist ties on your cables. And this is a 3-pin fan connector, and we're going to plug it onto a 3-pin fan header on the motherboard. Now this motherboard has several places for external fans, and what we want to do is run it to the connector that's closest to the fan to keep our cabling as clean as possible. So right here you'll see we've got a chassis fan 2 and chassis fan 3, and up by where the CPU fan plugs in we've got a couple more headers. I'm just going to go ahead and plug this connector onto chassis fan 2 because that's the closest to the fan. Okay, our build is almost done. Can you feel it? The next thing we've got to do intimidates a lot of people, and that is we're going to hook up these front switches, the front USB, the lights. All this stuff that's on the front comes through in this bundle of cables right here. It's called the front port umbilicals. And people see a big ball of wires and they just get intimidated by that. But here's the secret. Just handle it one cable at a time. Follow my advice, follow my steps, and before you know it, you'll have all the cables hooked up. So let's start with the USB 3.0 connectors, right? We've got USB 3 up here, and if your case has USB 3, then you've got this one connector that looks different than all the others. This is a 20-pin connector that's strictly for USB 3.0. No other cables look like this, very simple. If your motherboard supports USB 3.0, it will have the USB 3 header. Typically it's right next to the big power connector that comes from the power supply into the board. And you'll see this connector has a little notch in it, so it can only go in one way, and you just push it straight on. And you may hear it click into place. Some boards you can hear it. You may feel it click into place. You can give it a very gentle tug to make sure that it's in properly. And you've already got one cable out of the way. Now just watch how easy this next cable is to deal with. This case comes with sort of an antiquated 1394 FireWire connector, but our motherboard doesn't support that. So when we look down here at our cables, we've got one labeled 1394. And all we're going to do is just slide that out of the grommet so it's back behind the motherboard, and we're going to tie that one up because we don't use it. Suddenly the cables are dwindling and there's not so many, and it's not so intimidating, is it? Now the next connector we can hook up says HD audio right on it. So find that one. You'll see on the end of it, it's got one of the holes plugged up. And that's to ensure that it will only go on one way. Now on the motherboard, typically on most boards, it's all the way back in this corner, but you can check your motherboard manual to be sure. You'll see a connector that usually says front panel audio or HD audio. On this motherboard, it actually says HD audio, and you can see where the pin is missing. And we simply align that with the missing pin and push it straight on. Now these next set of cables are your switches and LEDs. It kind of looks like a lot, but there's really just 4 connectors here, and they're going to plug into the front panel header on your motherboard. Now the location of the front panel header along with the order in which the cables go on vary from manufacturer to manufacturer or even from board to board. Now on this motherboard, it's very simple to recognize. There's text written down right below the connector that tells you where each connector goes. Of course, you can refer to your motherboard manual if that text is too small or it's not clear. So if we take a close look at this connector, you'll see there's some very fine writing just below the connector, and it says HD LED with a little positive symbol. That tells you that the bottom 2 pins there are for the hard drive LED. And then above that it says PLED, that's the power LED. That goes directly above the hard drive LED. Anyway, you can see all the writing down here, and it's placed there in that order so you can tell without having to look at the manual where the cables go. But of course you can look at your manual if you find that to be any clearer. So we'll start with our hard drive LED, and the cable itself says positive on one side, negative on the other. So we want to rotate it so the positive is on the left side, and we're going to connect it here on the bottom row of the 2 pins on the furthest left. Now the next wire to grab says reset on it. So with the remaining cables, look for the one that says reset. Reset has no positive or negative, and we're just going to place it on the next 2 pins beside the hard drive LED we just plugged in. Next, grab those split cables, the one that says plus PLED and minus PLED. Put the plus PLED on the very top left pin. So it should be directly over the positive cable of the hard drive LED below it. And the same with the negative PLED, that goes on the next pin over. Now if you're following along with me, you should have just this one connector left. It says power SW, that's your power switch. That connects on to the last 2 connectors on top. That's right beside the power LED we just plugged in. And we've hooked up all our front panel switches and LEDs, but we can also hook up our front card reader. Now you may not have one of these, but this card reader that we've added is USB 2.0, and it's just got one connector. It's got a pin missing, so again it can only be installed one way. Now if we look closely down here at the bottom of the board, you'll see we've got these 2 connectors. These are both USB 2.0 ports that are optional, and we can use either one of them. It doesn't matter which one. You'll see there's a pin missing on the bottom right corner, and on the connector itself there's a pin missing. So we just want to rotate that connector so that the missing pin lines up with the blocked port, and so that it only goes on one way and it just plugs straight on. Now the next thing we have to hook up are the data cables for our drives. As I previously mentioned, the motherboard came with 1 pair of cables. So in this bag you'll see I've got 2 SATA cables here. It's 1 cable per drive, and we're going to be 1 short, but I'm a computer tech. I have lots of cables left over, so I went in my parts bin. I found an extra black one that'll match the color. So that's 3. We got 1 cable for each drive. We got 3 drives. We need 3 cables. Now, if you need to order extra cables, something you should consider is when these cables first came out, they didn't have any clip on them. You see, this is an older SATA cable, and it just plugs in, and it's just what we call a friction fit. And they also can fall off real easy. So they fixed that by adding a little metal clip to the connector that locks into place so that the cable won't fall out. It really was a bigger problem with people who were shipping computers or moving computers around. I mean, obviously, if your computer's going to sit in one place, that clip doesn't matter that much. But if you're going to buy a cable anyway, if I were you, I'd make sure you get the kind that have the clip on it, so that it's just a problem. You won't have to worry about the cable coming loose. Now another thing to consider when you're going to purchase your cables is you'll see that one of the cables that came with the motherboard has a 90-degree angle on one end of the cable. It's like an L shape. And that's so, well, if we turn the computer around here, if we have the straight end of the cable sticking out of the back of the hard drive, it could interfere with closing the panel. And it's not to say you couldn't use the straight end, but it'd be a lot safer if you use this L-shaped connector on the back of any drives that are facing the panel. And because we have two drives that are facing the panel, ideally we'll have two connectors that have this L shape on one end. So the motherboard rather, only came with one cable that has this L shape on one end. And if you were going to order another cable and you had two drives like this that are going to be in a case like this, you should order one with the exact same kind of cable with the L shape on one end, so that both drives, that way the data cables won't interfere with closing the panel. And again, you could probably get away with using the straight end, but it's just a lot safer and it just takes the risk out of it by making sure. I mean, you got to order a cable anyway, so why not make sure you get the best one for the job. Now, speaking of that, let's grab our L-shaped connector cable and let's go ahead and plug that right onto the back of our SATA drive. We'll start there, and that'll just click right into position, and run the other end of the cable through the wire grommet here in the back of the case. We're going to turn the computer around. Now, right here on the board are our SATA connectors, and this board has 8 of them, and there's a little sticker here on these that says, for better performance, make sure you hook up your drives to SATA ports 0 through 5. The SATA ports start at 0 instead of starting at 1, so 0 through 5 is 6, right? Because 0 is 1, 1 is 2, 2 is 3. Anyway, we take the other end of our cable and we want to plug that into SATA port 0. So how do you know which one's SATA port 0? Well, if you look closely, there's etchings on the board, and it says SATA 0-1, SATA 2-3, and SATA 4-5. The first number listed is the bottom port. So we can go ahead and make sure you rotate the connector in the right direction and just plug that straight on. It'll click into position. Now we're going to turn the computer case back around so we have access to our drives again. Grab the other SATA connector that has the L-shaped connector on one end, and we're going to plug that here onto the back of our mechanical drive. And again, you'll hear and you'll feel that click into place. And just like before, we're going to run that through the wire grommet here and turn the computer case around. Now this connector is going to plug in right above the connector we just plugged in into SATA port 1, and that clicks into place. And finally, take the last SATA connector we have. It's straight on both sides. Doesn't matter which side you want to use. Go ahead and plug one end of it into the back of the optical drive. Now if you want to keep your cabling clean, you can take the other end of this cable and push it through the wire grommet, run it around behind and through the back, down through the bottom wire grommet, and then plug it into SATA port 3, which is the bottom connector right in the middle. And now all of our drives are hooked up. Now it's time for us to install our video card. So let's get the video card out of its box. Let's see what we get. So just set that somewhere. That's pretty good, that'll do. And in the box, what do we have? Let's take a look. What comes with a video card? Well, here we've got the video card in an anti-static bag. We'll take that out and set it down. We've got some egg crate type packaging. Just set that there. At the bottom of the box is another box. Inside this box, we have some stuff. Your video card should come with some stuff too. Now, this stuff happens to be a couple of power adapters in case your power supply doesn't have the right power connectors for your video card. We won't need that because we've got a good power supply, so we'll just put these in the bag with the motherboard parts. We've got an HDMI cable. It's a nice touch. Might be able to use that. We've got another bridging connector. Remember, our motherboard came with a bridging connector, and this is a crossfire bridging connector. That's for hooking up two ATI video cards. So put that away because you might need it for another build someday. What else do we have in here? We've got some instructions. These are very important. Put those away. And there's, oh, I don't know, something written in another language, and some serial number stuff for some kind of SAPPHIRE membership. This is a DVI to VGA adapter. I guess if your monitor doesn't have a DVI port available, or you don't have a DVI cable, I don't know, you could adapt it down to regular VGA, so we'll put that away. We've got a powered by SAPPHIRE sticker. That'll make your computer go faster if you put it on there, right? And then we've got our driver installation disk. And that's what comes with the video card. Now, of course, the first thing we've got to do is get our video card out of its protective anti-static packaging here. And make sure when you take the video card out, you hold it by the metal edge here if you can, just this big connector here. And then once you can get a good grip on the big plastic heatsink, just go ahead and grab that. You can grab it like this. You want to keep your fingers off of any of the metal parts, such as what they call the gold fingers, the PCIe connector here, and the whole bottom of the circuit board. You want to avoid touching that to avoid any accidental electrostatic discharge. But holding it just like I'm showing you is completely safe and in fact recommended. I'm going to go ahead and set that on top of the static bag here. It's not going to hurt anything, and more importantly, it won't scratch my counter. Now, this motherboard has two places where you can plug in the video card. Why two places? Because it supports having up to 2 video cards. When you have 2 video cards, it's called SLI mode, and each video card does half the work, so theoretically you have twice the performance. However, we're not using SLI mode, so since we only have 1 video card, we use the topmost connector, the large connector. It's got if you look very closely, it's got a lock that moves left and right that holds the card into position. And we're going to need to remove 2 of these covers. How do we know which 2 need to be removed? Well, if we just pick the card up and place it right over where we're going to plug it in, we can see that the second and third covers back here have to be removed. So get my screwdriver out, and I'm going to go ahead and take out the second from the top and the third from the top. And I'm going to hold those covers in so they don't fall out. And they're just going to slide back and out. So these are the bay covers I was referring to. And then we take our video card, make sure that the little plastic retainer is in the unlock position, holding the video card properly, hover it right over the connector, and you're also going to have to push it a little bit towards the back of the case so that the groove in the video card lines up with the groove in the connector, and then push it straight on. And then you can grab the little, on this motherboard sometimes the retaining lock will move by itself. On this motherboard you can actually move it with your finger and lock that into position. Next, we're going to take the 2 screws we just removed and put them right back where they came from. You might want to lift up on the video card a little bit. Now, our video card is not going to work without power hooked up to it. If we try to turn the computer on right now, we won't get any video out of it. So in that bundle of cables that came with our power supply, we want to look for the one that's got connectors on it that say PCI-E. Now, if I remove this twist tie, you'll see we've got 2 of these connectors on this one cable. See that? If I can hold it so you can see it, that would be helpful of me, wouldn't it? And then the other end of the cable says PSU on it. That's power supply unit. That's the end that goes to the power supply. Now we're going to use both of these connectors, and you see there's a split connector on both of these. There's 2 additional pins because some video cards require 6 pins, some require 8, some require a combination. This video card requires 2 8-pin plugs, so we just make sure that we take the 2 extra connectors here and we just push them together, and that makes an 8-pin connector. The 8-pin connector goes on with the clip facing the down position, and we just push that straight on like that. Then grab the next connector and make sure it forms an 8-pin connector as well. Clip again in the down position and plug it into the next connector over, and you'll hear that click into position. Next, we can take the other end of the cable and we can run it through the back of the case to keep our cabling looking nice and clean. And we can bring the other end of that cable down through here through this bottom wiring grommet. And we're going to plug it into our power supply, and we can plug it into any of these ports up here on the top row. And I just realized I made a mistake earlier when I said that you could plug your hard drive into any of these plugs on the bottom, because this last plug on the bottom says CPU/PCIe, which means it's the same plug, just this one on the end, as the remaining plugs on top. So this remaining cable can go into any of the plugs on top or this last plug on the bottom. So again, it's just about what's going to look best. I'm going to obviously turn the cable so that the clip is facing down, and I'm just going to keep it with the other cables and plug it in the next available position. Now the final component we have to install is our Wi-Fi card. Now this is a PCI wireless N, which means it'll support, well, this wireless N will support up to 300 megabits per second. That means 150 up and 150 down. And when you check your speed, that's how you know if you're getting the 300, is it's actually going to say 150. Now let's open the box and see what you get with your Wi-Fi card. Let's see what we got in here. We've got a driver disc. We've got our instruction manual. We've got a low profile adapter. That's for a low profile computer, one of those computers that's only like yay tall. We won't be using that. We've got a couple of antennae. And then we've got the card itself in an anti-static bag. And that's it. So we'll begin by removing the card from the anti-static bag. And again, I'm going to hold it by the edges, and once I've got it out, I'm going to hold it by the big metal retaining plate here. So we're just going to hold that like that. Set that down. Let's go ahead and take the antenna out of the bag. Now this adapter has 2 antennas. Some have 1, some have 3. It just kind of depends on the manufacturer and which version of wireless N it supports. And wireless N is backwards compatible with wireless G and wireless B. It'll just run at the slower speeds. Now installing the Wi-Fi card is very, very simple. This happens to be a PCI Wi-Fi card, and that means it plugs into a PCI socket on the motherboard. So you want to make sure if you're going to order a Wi-Fi card that it has the right socket for your motherboard. If your motherboard doesn't have any PCI sockets, you can't use this card. So this motherboard does in fact have one PCI socket. If it didn't, we could order a PCI Express version of the same card, which is just a much smaller connector. Or we could go with a USB Wi-Fi card and just hook it up externally. Plugging it in internally is just a cleaner install, that's all. Now to determine which of these screws we need to remove to make room for this Wi-Fi card to plug in, we can use the same trick I showed you on the video card, which is to just take the card and hover it over the socket you're going to plug it into. And that lines up there with the 3rd screw from the bottom. So we're going to go ahead and take out that 3rd screw from the bottom and remove this cover. And again, the cover will go in the motherboard box with all the other extra parts. And the card's just going to plug straight in. You just want to make sure that you align the groove in the card with the groove in the socket. And then just make sure it's fully seated. Push straight down on it. And you should be able to see the connector go right into the socket. And then take the screw we just removed and put that right back in. Now the Wi-Fi card came with a couple of antennae, and you want to wait until you install the card before you put the antennas on, or these get in the way of trying to get the card installed. And these just screw right on, and they just, turn them till they stop. They don't have to be tight. And then the antenna themselves are on a hinge that bends, and you can sort of rotate them. It's said that one antenna up and one antenna sideways is the optimal configuration, though you can experiment with it and see which gives you the best reception in your environment with your router. Alright, so we've run out of parts. That must mean everything's already installed and we're ready to turn the computer on for the very first time and see if it boots up. Now obviously we don't have Windows installed or anything, so we're just gonna see if the machine does what's called a post or a power on self-test, and it should tell us there's no bootable device, something along those lines. Now when you do your very first boot up, you don't want to plug in any peripherals to the PC except what you need. What you need is a keyboard, a mouse, a monitor, and power. No speakers, no internet, no printers, no flash drives. If this thing doesn't boot up, we want to limit our diagnostics and what we have to do to figure out why it's not turning on. So leave all that other stuff you don't need unplugged for right now. So for my keyboard and mouse, you see I've got a wireless keyboard and mouse there, and they each have their own USB receiver. And on the back of the computer, 2 of the USB ports are black. Those are USB 2.0s. And we want to make sure that we plug these USB keyboard and mouse into the USB 2.0 ports, because if you use USB 3.0 ports, when you go to install your operating system, it may not see your keyboard and mouse and you won't be able to do your operating system install. So to avoid that situation, just make sure if you have USB 2.0 ports, and you know, because as I said before, they're black in color, make sure you use those for your keyboard and mouse. Besides, you're just wasting your USB 3.0 port for your keyboard and mouse anyway. Next, we're going to hook up our monitor, and we can use either of the connectors on the back of the video card, doesn't matter which one you use. And then finally, we've got our power connector. So the power connector, we're going to plug that in as the very last thing into the back of the power supply. Flip the switch on the back of the power supply to the on position, and then let's hit our power button and hold our breath and see what happens here. It's alive. I see the lights have lit up on the front fans. I hear the fans turning. Let me just rotate this a little bit so we can see. And what's the screen say? The screen says insert boot media, which is exactly what I was referring to with the no bootable device, because we haven't installed Windows yet. Now's a good time to just check and make sure all the fans that you've hooked up are turning. That means the 2 front fans, the rear exhaust fan, the power supply fan, which is on the bottom, which we can check, the 2 fans up on the water cooler, and the fans on the underside of the video card, which you kind of have to look under there. All those fans should be turning. Now, considering we've got 2, 3, 5, 7, 8 fans, the system's actually pretty quiet for 8 fans. And then you can see the Corsair H100i water cooler changes colors there. You can see the colors are changing on the Corsair logo that's on the heatsink, which is kind of cool. And now we can install our operating system. Now he's using Windows 8, so I'll make a separate video showing you how to install Windows 8. I've already got a video showing you how to install and optimize Windows 7, including optimizations for a solid state drive. All right, so now I can turn this off, and I'm going to go ahead and install the operating system, and I'm going to clean up this wiring. All right, so I've gone ahead and I've wire tied up all the wires, done the best cable management I can under the circumstances. You can see if I kind of turn it around this way, that's what it looks like there on the inside. And on the other side, where we ran all of our cables to get them out of the way and out of sight, those are tied up to look just like they do. There's no real rhyme or reason to cable management other than, you know, depending on the hardware you have and what looks important, you know, how important the looks are to you. Certain areas of your case need to be clear of cabling. It's really an individual decision when you do that. So this is the best I personally could do with the hardware that we have here, and I think it looks pretty darn good. Now if I just turn this slightly to the side here, you'll be able to see me put the side panel on. We're going to go ahead and start with the right side panel first. The right side being, if you're facing the computer, be the right side. It's probably, yeah, it's going to be your left. And we're going to start with grabbing the side panel that doesn't have any holes on it. It's just completely solid. Now these particular side panels that come with the 500R don't have anything to grip the case along the edges. And maybe they did that because they didn't want to potentially strip any wires. They knew that that's where people were going to run their wires. But what ends up happening is, normally when I put the cover on, you go about 3/4 of the way on like so. And what's happening is these cables down here on the bottom, sort of have to get picked up a little bit because there's just a little ridge that sits right on top of the bottom of the case there. And all we have to do really is just line that up, push it forward, and you can see nothing keeps the case from popping out from the sides. Normally there is there's little grips or teeth that will come out and hold that into position. So what we need to do when we put the 500R case on is just make sure it's straight and level. Run your finger underneath. If it doesn't feel like it's straight, you may have to push it in a bit. And while it's being pushed in, you can go ahead and turn these thumb screws. And we need to do the same thing up here on the top. I do wish that the case did have the traditional type hooks or grabs that most cases have on their side panels. And of course, when they do that, you've just got to be cautious of not snagging your wiring. When they don't do that, it just makes it a little bit more difficult, to me anyway, to make sure that your side panel's on straight. But that side panel is on. You can see what that looks like. Turn it around. Now this is the side that we're going to open in the future, probably most often. This is our other side panel that has a fan on the side of it, which I have right here. Now there is this one last cable to hook up, and it is a proprietary cable. This doesn't plug into the motherboard. This is not a standard 3-pin fan header connector. Now this fan cable is going to be the last thing we have to hook up. We've got the fan header power cable coming down from the umbilicals that come down from the top of the case that connect to the other two front fans up here. And these two just go together. They only go in one direction. And as you can see, it'll just click together like so. And now we can take this side panel and again set it forward and push it straight on, and then turn the thumb screws. Now if you like, you can get a screwdriver and tighten those thumb screws down a little bit just to make sure that nobody gets in there without a tool. But that's entirely up to you. So here's our completed computer, but it's not really completed yet because we're missing a couple of really critical importance on a gaming computer. We need a gaming mouse. So here we've got the Corsair M65 performance gaming mouse right here. I'm going to set that down. We've got the Vengeance K90 gaming keyboard. I actually use this on my own workstation to get work done. I like the macro keys. They've replaced this now. You can't find the K90 anymore. If you can, it's really expensive. But it's just a normal process in this business that the companies keep evolving their products. This model has the Cherry MX red switches. So we could set that right over here. And then early on in the video, I made a mistake. I know, hard to believe, right? I made a mistake that he was using an Asus monitor. Well, actually, what he's got, I borrowed it from him to complete the video. This is a Dell 27-inch LED monitor. The model number here is S2740L. And this will be a great gaming monitor. But for my testing, I want to kick it up just one more notch. ready to game. Hope you enjoyed the video. As always, please do like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time.